So the Delhi rape case obviously brought a lot of things to light, and you are working very closely with that case, obviously with the Verma Commission, etc. There is an issue about fast track courts being a particular solution to one aspect of this case. What is your take on fast track courts?
It's tough to say, look at fast track courts as the starting point of the entire solution. I think somewhere to address the entire question of gender, you think beyond fast track courts, because the Delhi incident is hardly a question of the fast track courts. It's more a question of institutionalized bias against women in the Indian legal system, and that's a far more deeper challenge, which is what needs to be addressed. And I think it comes to light if you read the way even rape trials are conducted in the country, and the question of the sensitivity of right from the police officer to the prosecutor to the defense lawyer to the judge. These are the questions which really come into mind, and the question of how the legal process works to demean the woman, even after the indignity, after the outrage, she's suffered, right? And in spite of that, the legal process treats her as not as a victim, but treats her as an accused, as someone who's guilty of having committed a crime. And so I think it's about changing that, the way the culture of the courts operates, and that's the larger challenge, I would think. If that can be done, where you're able to make the legal system respond to in a more gender just way, that would be the fundamental challenge I would really think, rather than the fast track courts. So.
One of the things that were controversial, and maybe this is more emotionally charged than anything else, was the issue that one of the perpetrators of this crime was underage. He was under 18, but he happens to be only 17, I think 17 and a half or something like that. And obviously his punishment under the eyes of the law will be significantly less than everybody else's, but he was involved in the same way. What is your take on that with regards to juvenile law?
See, the way I was thinking of it is, when a horrible outrage like this happens, right, what should the response be, right? I think the response should be, how do you broaden the circle of empathy such that more people come within your compass of empathy? Meaning to say that, the way we should think about it is that this should not happen again, not to whom it happened in Delhi, obviously. It should not happen again to, say, women in the northeast or in Kashmir who are subjects of violent rape by the Indian Army. It shouldn't happen to women in violent marital relationships, because marital rape is not an offence in this country. It shouldn't happen to domestic workers, because domestic workers face a whole range of harassment when they go to work in that. It shouldn't happen to women from the Dalit community who are seen as perceived to be sexually available as far as the upper caste person is concerned, at all and every point in time. So I would imagine a response to an incident such as this should be to say this shouldn't happen to a range of people, really, and that's the way we should think about it. And I'm not very comfortable with the idea that, the way we respond to an incident is by calling for revenge. And somehow I think when we say castration, when we say death penalty, and when we say lower the age of the juvenile, all three demands, right? They are demands which take us back as far as human rights standards are concerned. The demands which are, in a sense, they satisfy a certain kind of primitive, maybe bloodlust, if you want to call it that, but they do nothing as far as the victims are really concerned. So if you want to deal with the question of the victim who women who will continue to be victims of the system, then I think it's very important that we try and address the issues faced by a larger spectrum of women in this country. So for example, I'm not saying something which is my opinion alone. I think that's what in effect the Verma Committee report has done. Because what they've done is, they've heard all these testimonies. They've heard, for example, the sense of deep anger and outrage against what happened. But they say that we need to transmute this anger and outrage into a wider politics of hope. And so they've come up with a range of recommendations which take seriously the issue of rape by the Indian Army, which take seriously the issue of marital rape, which take seriously the issue of rape of domestic workers, and they've done it through that mechanism. So, and they've said that the way to go forward is not by reneging from international commitments or to renege from a human rights commitments. Our commitments are, for example, we don't believe in cruel or unusual punishment, so we can't have castration, right? That's the Indian constitution. That's the framework of international law to which we subscribe to. Then we can't have death penalty, because once again, death penalty, the global trend is towards abolition of death penalty and ensuring it's for the fewer and fewer offences, not increasing the number of offences for which you can give death penalty. And thirdly, we don't lower the age of the juvenile, because we've signed on to the Convention on Rights of the Child, which recognizes the fact that as far as juveniles are concerned, we believe that they should be dealt with differently from the adult legal system. And the Verma Committee report has come out with a very powerful finding, saying that you have to ask the question, why are juveniles committing crimes? That's the fundamental question you have to ask. Is it because of the individual psychopathology of this particular individual, or is it something as a wider social problem? And the answer they come to, the answer they point to, is that it's a wider social problem. You're talking about a breakdown of the institution of the family, you're talking about a breakdown of social institutions, you're talking about kids who don't have schooling, who don't have relationships with the family because of the difficult circumstances. The mother goes out very early, comes out very late, and all these reasons account for this degree of violence as far as young people are concerned. So they need to be dealt with, and saying you need to sort the issue out. You need to ensure that young people, are not this violent anymore. And so I think it's a very very powerful way of thinking about it, saying that douse this public outrage in terms of, or not even douse, I'd say that convert the public outrage into a more productive future as far as all women are concerned. That's the way forward.
A lot of the changes that you're advocating, and with regards to your work with Verma Commission, are great, and these recommendations are very strong, but a lot of them involve large changes in the way that people perceive gender, the way that people perceive women, the way that we respect each other as people. Can the law play such a large part in being part of this shift in thinking?
No, that's why I think this shift in thinking has to be wider. It has come from a wider people's movement, clearly. And the law can only take those changes on board and try and make it a part of an institutional mechanism, institutional setup, right? So if the larger thinking is that we need more sensitivity on questions of gender, if you can convert that into a legal formulation, then you've taken the struggle forward. So that's the way I look at it. I mean, obviously the Verma Committee report means nothing without the popular upsurge of which it is the logical outcome. So I would think that the role of a people's movement would be take forward the recommendations and try and ensure that these recommendations are implemented. So that will be the struggle.
The case of Ijipura, so this is area in Ijipura, there are slum dwellers who are now being evicted for development purposes, and ALF has played a part in that particular process. Could you talk to us a little bit about ALF's involvement in that particular process, and then maybe your own thoughts with regards to what's going on in Ijipura?
No, I think the fundamental point we'd like to make is that every person has the right to live with dignity as far as the Indian Constitution is concerned, and you have the right to livelihood. That's once again guaranteed under the Indian Constitution. And it's just almost perverse that if the government decides to evict people, I mean, do they just like throw them out? I mean, is that the way you do it? Don't you think there should be some mechanism where you make some provision as far as people are concerned when you evict them out? Should that not be a first consideration, that, I mean, this is the way we work, let's make an alternative arrangement, and then you go ahead with whatever plan you have. In this case, you begin with the thing that we can just throw people off. That's the fundamental objection which we had to the way the entire process happened. And I think it's a larger failure to provide housing as far as the large majority of people in the city are really concerned.
One of my final questions deal with the whole issue of the role law plays in media and in art. So very recently, Kamal Hassan's movie was banned in Karnataka and in Andhra Pradesh, and a lot of the reasons why the government was giving that the movie was banned was that it could become a law and order issue, right? Because there were a few groups. We live in a very diverse country, and there are a lot of people sensitive with a lot of things. What part does law play in banning forms of expression like that? Is it necessary, or is it an infringement with regards to our rights as people in democracy?
I think this is my colleague Lawrence Liang said, we seem to live in a country which is an eggshell democracy. Meaning to say that everybody is always very quick to get hurt on what things are said and what matters are communicated. So there's a way in which we need a strong, more robust democracy where you're able to take difference of opinion without without resorting to the power of banning. I think the great example, of course, is M.F. Hussain and the banning of his works and his own persecution using the criminal law. So the law is very easily used to persecute people uh, who do under the Indian Constitution have the right to freedom of expression. It is, of course, subject to public order. That's the limitation. But the public order should always be interpreted narrowly because it's an exception. And an exception surely cannot hold the rule to ransom. The rule says freedom of speech and expression. The exception says subject to reasonable restrictions, subject to public order. And surely public order cannot become a ground for even denying people the right to freedom of speech and expression. So that's where.
And how do we go past then this eggshell democracy? Because that makes a lot of sense. Because there's obviously a lot of people in this country that need protection under the law and need these services. But then how do we move beyond that to ensure that democracy as a whole and freedom of expression is protected?
I would imagine there's also a role for a more mature political leadership, which is able to just take a position on these kind of issues. Like, for example, the recent Ashish Nandi case, where politicians were baying for his blood, and it's most perverse when what he said was the exact opposite of what it was made out to be that he said. When his point is that, I mean, people like you and me, meaning to say him and the other person he's speaking about, engage in corruption all the time. And then why do we make the big thing about SCSTs being corrupt? That seems to be a ignoring of our corruption and focusing on their corruption. And actually, we are the more corrupt of the two. That was the point he's making. But I don't know. I mean, what is the? It's a very supremely sensitive. People seem to be very, very sensitive to the least perception of hurt, and everybody is always getting upset or hurt over something or the other. So somewhere we need a greater level of maturity. That's the only way I can think about it. To be able to take difference of opinion is difference of opinion. Words don't hurt, and that's one way of looking at it. And you should just try and protect the right of freedom of speech and expression as much as possible. And say that, I mean, if you're offended, you're offended. Express your offense. Express the fact that you're offended by a counter statement, by a counter protest, if you want to call it, whatever it might be. But don't ask for voices to be silenced. Because if I ask for your voice to be silenced, tomorrow my voice can be silenced. So it's very important that you allow different opinions to have free play without the law coming in to control these opinions. And that's the resort to the law is part of the problem. I think the Khushbu case was the other one which I remember in the past, where she made a statement, I think, about Tamil woman, about premarital sex. She said people have premarital sex, and there's a huge protest and ruckus over the whole thing. And they filed criminal cases against her in many districts in Tamil Nadu. Supreme Court finally came out with a decision which basically said that these are tools of harassment and violation of the right to freedom of speech and expression. So once again, the courts have been fairly progressive on this point, I would say. So the challenge is not so much the courts, because the courts have understood that you protect the right of freedom of speech and expression, and that you construe the exceptions very narrowly. So it goes to court. You generally get, apart from the Kamal Hassan case, which is of course the exact counter example, you generally get a positive decision. But the question is with respect to what do you do with these elements in society who are so offended, and then they file a case immediately. So that's the larger challenge, really.
What are your plans for the future, Arvind? Is it ALF all the way till you retire? What do you want to be doing with yourself?
No, we've had this discussion together with other colleagues and friends, and we also think that when organizations get fossilized and get become unidimensional, is when the same person is there forever and ever, right? So I mean, you also don't create that space for new people to come in and to take the organization in different directions. So I would imagine that should clearly be part of the vision. I mean, I don't have a specific timeline in my mind, but I think that clearly, I think younger people should take over and take the organization in other directions. Of course, I mean, for us, it's a slightly different setup in the sense that we are a collective. So, for example, we don't really differentiate between the oldest and the youngest person within the organization, where the youngest person also has an equal voice, because decisions are taken democratically through Monday morning meeting. But all that being said, still the fact that you've been there for longer means that you have some ways more of a weight than maybe people who come in just yesterday or 2 days before, kind of a thing. So I would imagine that ideally speaking, that I would want other people to take over as far as the organization is concerned. So,
Arvind, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.